Okay, that's my mother and my father. Aren't they pretty? Yes. That's me. The reason is because when you start thinking of age, you know, as I talk about my life, that's me too. That's not me. Can you read what it says down here? Tactical evasion of desegregation in Crest. In other words, rather than let anybody integrate the store, they took all the seats off. If you look there, you see a blue ring around somebody's head. That's me at the mass meeting. She's up there because I'll talk about her. That's my best girlfriend with her mother. I'm in this group, but I can't find me. This is a prayer in. We walked to City Square and prayed. This is Iowa City High. I'm in something here. This is me right after being in jail. I had to go take a picture, so there you go. This is the black high school I went to before. If you look over to the end up here, that's me. This was my boyfriend.
Where was this?
Orangeburg, South Carolina. Me practicing for Allstate. I was the number one pianist in the state of Iowa. And City High's first black Allstate pianist. And I was first black Allstate pianist. That's a story you're going to hear about. This is a jail I was in.
And where was that?
Orangeburg. I was in this one time and this cell one time. My mother on the picket line. Okay, that's me marching to the jail. If you look by the telephone pole, I'm to the right of the telephone pole. I think this is the last one. So that's all I wanted to show you for right now. I just wanted to give you something to remember. I know I couldn't if I was in your shoes. Okay, we'll get started. I'm so happy to have a chance to work on this because I discovered that I was trying to write it like a book, a novel book, linear, but I discovered that by doing this, that poetry and essay style is the best way to do this. So that's how I'm going to write the book now. I'm not going to read to you all the time. And if you don't understand something or have a question, raise your hand. I'll look for it. I'll look at you. Here's the poem. And what I do is usually write a poem that ends up encapsulating the whole experience. This one is called Farewell to Beauty. The little girl was allowed to become, as the old folks would say, be that way. Free to enjoy the beauty of a home, the smell of green grass, and the sound of a Baldwin, not a Steinway piano, whose ebony color served to protect as she joyfully became. Barriers impeded the becoming. Race quickly trumped parental control. The signs, the rules ordered her feet. Yet the legacy had been planted. But would she be the one to fight injustice? Not only the barriers blocked the way and the death of her loving father, but the smell of gladiolas fused with the sound of taps as America bid farewell to another colored sun. So why? Why are we doing this? As I move forward trying to complete this presentation, fighting all the way to the end, I had to keep in mind the purpose of this opportunity, the why of this blessing. I'm now 71. Usually it takes this long to review the life you've lived and continue to live. I believe I've had a blessed life and a rich journey to this moment in time. To be in Iowa City and have a talk with the good citizens of this very special place is not to be taken lightly. My first visit was as a little girl, being taken on what we call an awakening journey by my mother. The second time was on a presentation journey. The third time was as a future reality. If you ever come, there's a saying in the black community, because I don't know if you say this in white community, if you've ever been to Iowa City, you will return. Do y'all say that?
Yeah.
I not only returned, but I continued to return. I married twice in Iowa City. I received a good education here. I had the most enriching development in the arts here. Then I had many opportunities here, educated among many places. And then my children were educated here. I grew into a woman here in Iowa City. It was not easy. But for this little colored child from the South, I made it through, though I had many stumbling blocks that were put in the way. When Emily invited me to talk, I was very touched. It was nice to know that a former student of mine remembered me and wanted to introduce her retired teacher and to others in the building where Stevie Smith, the draft card burner, remember when he burned the draft card? He protested in front of this building, put a tent up on the left side, stayed there. He gave this building quite a rouse, you know? What had happened, he had been in Mississippi for the summer working with discrimination. Then there was the war in Vietnam. That's all he needed. His parents weren't too happy. This next one is called Box of Cherries. I like cherries. How about you? I was born a colored girl, segregated southern city of Oklahoma City. Oklahoma is where I was born. I was placed in a colored nursery upon my arrival, which was private. I was the only colored baby born that week. Also, not to mention, they had just allowed me to do it because they had no colored section of the hospital. Everyone white went there. Then my cousin, Dr. Finley, got the rights to treat patients in the hospital. So I was the first baby born at Oklahoma University Hospital. First colored baby. That's what they called us then, colored. My teachers were colored. My minister was colored. My doctor was colored. My pharmacist was colored. The delivery boys were colored. Taxi cabs and all basic needs were colored. I lived in a colored world, but not just any kind of colored world, but a black, bougie colored world, made up of light-skinned and damn near white-colored folks, which means an education or money was the one that you allowed to be. This was a Jack and Jill community. You probably don't know what Jack and Jill is. Jack and Jill is an organization, which I'm ashamed to say, that black people had to train children of the other good black people to be with. In other words, you get what I'm saying? It's sort of like a debutante group, putting the better people together. You know about that. For fun, we went to colored movies, bowling alleys, nightclubs, pool halls, and to exercise, we went to the colored YM or YMCs, A's. And colored day at the circus. Yeah, we had colored day at the circus. This was a world from which colored parents tried to shield from their children. That's what my mother said. She was about to die. I asked her, what was it like to rear me? She said, it really was difficult trying to rear your child and have them see colored, don't go, colored. That was difficult. It was really hard. As a septuagenarian black woman, at times I do feel guilty of my look. Yet I wouldn't change my looks if given the chance. I would keep my clothes, my hair looking the same way. I love my skin, my eyes, my hair, my nose, and particularly my feet. I have the most gorgeous feet you ever want to see. I love my history, I love my past, my life, but then I begin. There is a book somewhere inside of me. What it is and where it is, I do not know. What I know is it has been tapping at my heart for years. Well, I now have time to find this hidden jewel. I'm retired. If it is a jewel, I must purge it from my soul and purge it from my butt. Something, I got to get this book out. So how do I squeeze this book from my soul, my anus, my mouth, my brain? It's got to be a grandiose purging. I'm 71 years old. I live in a senior residence. Yes, senior. But I see this happening to me when I'm looking for love in all the wrong places, I didn't see it coming. None of you did, huh? So after the passage of the '64 Civil Rights Bill, I believed all the doors had opened. I did eat the whole box of cherries. I must say it worked for me, but I was in for a big shock. When I thought becoming a professor at a major white university, I received 3 degrees. I just thought that I wouldn't have to deal with those things again. I really did eat the whole box of chocolate-covered cherries. I really did. I was surprised. So that's the beginning of how I got here and why. So,
Question. What was the connection of you in Oklahoma? Your parents, what was the connection there?
My mother was born in New Orleans. My father was born in Oklahoma City. I'll be talking about that in the next essay. Good question.
What attracted you to move to Iowa City?
It's in here. You'll get it. So, because now I'm going to start talking about those Oklahoma years. 1948, on July 26, President Harry Truman issued Executive Order 9981, directing the desegregation of the armed forces. Then Alice Coachman became the first African-American woman to win an Olympic gold medal. On October 1st, the California Supreme Court barred laws banning interracial marriages in the state. On May 3rd, the U.S. Supreme Court rules in Shelley versus Kramer that state and local governments cannot enforce racially restrictive housing. E. Franklin Frazier, who was the president of Howard University, became the first African-American president of the African Sociological Association. Also, in the year 1498, during the Truman presidency, a tornado had touched down in Oklahoma City. During the month of March, another tornado touched down. Moi. They said the first thing I did in coming out, I was a C-section baby. And the first thing they did when I came up was like a black power salute. And they wanted to know, what's the weight? 7 pounds, 8 ounces of beauty. It's a healthy baby girl. Camille's first grandchild. This you need to know. Oklahoma City, I was delivered by my cousin. We had relatives all over Oklahoma City. They can take care of you if you're sick, do your teeth, do your embalming when you died, you know, druggists. We had all of that. Those were my uncles and cousins. But then when it was time to put me away into baby nursery, it was a colored nursery I was in. And the birth certificate says colored. It does. I was born into a segregated world. As I said, presented with the first Black Power fist. I was a new fighter, and I was going to really stop some things. At least that's what they thought. Everything was segregated. Buses were segregated, schools were segregated, water fountains were segregated, schools were segregated. And I wonder if you guys know what that means. Because I was somewhere talking about segregated schools. Somebody thought I meant white teachers. Segregated everything. My teachers were black, my friends were black. Oh, I mean colored at this point. When I was a little girl, about 3 years old, my mama took me to an Oklahoma department store. And we were going around, water fountain. I ran into the water fountain. And she grabbed my hand, pulled me back. Why can't I get some water? Because you're colored. What's that? It means it says for white only. What's white? I said. And she said, pointed to a little white girl. Take a look at this. I couldn't tell the difference. But that was when I learned I was colored. I was 3 years old. You remember that 3-year-old picture of me on the bicycle? That's when I learned that I was colored. Think about it. When did you learn that you were colored or white? When did you learn that? Think about it. I used to ask that question of all my students when we had social justice classes. The white students seemed either to know or never had thought about it. Where every black child or other people that were different in the class learned at it very early. Just think about that. I also missed my fame in a magazine. I was supposed to be the ebony pet milk baby. Yes, they got, Negroes and colored folks to be in the magazines. So I'm being the Negro pet milk baby in Ebony magazine. The photographers came to take my picture. They say, I'm sorry, ma'am, she looks like she's Japanese. And that was the end of that. Then my mama turned around and said, she doesn't drink pet milk anyway. Well, you asked a question about how did this all happen? Well, it had been a difficult pregnancy for my mother. She and my father were living at Pasadena. And I find that she was pregnant and they knew the birth would be difficult. The parents moved to Oklahoma City, my mom and dad, because they could get all the free medical care, since everybody there could take care of you. They can even take care of you from womb to tomb. In fact, when my dad died, my uncles actually did the embalming and took care of it all. We had to have those kind of things in a black community. We couldn't go to the white community to do it. So we had to develop our communities to have doctors, lawyers, and everything. My name was Patricia Camille Roan. Like the river, the Rhone River. But people called me Tisch because my grandfather's name was Patrick. My daddy was named Patrick. So it was Big Pat, Little Pat, and I couldn't say me named Tishy. So I couldn't say Patricia, so I said me named Tishy, so I'm Tisch. Now, Oklahoma City touted itself to be a liberal city. One of my fondest memories was going to my Uncle Jim's drugstore. Uncle Jim was my grandmother's brother. He would let me come into the pharmacy. It would be all this candy all over the place. He'd tell me go get as much as I want. And so I pulled my dress up. So I loved that. Also had a soda fountain in there. The best soda malt you ever wanted to have. Guess what though? Ralph Ellison, do you know who Ralph Ellison is? Wrote Invisible Man, worked there. He would make my sodas. Isn't that something? But I didn't know this till I became an adult, when I found out he'd written a letter of sympathy for my father's death. Also, the medicine was tasty. He would make sure it was sweet. Oh, there they had a colored walking doll. I don't know if you remember those dolls. You'd hold them by the hands and walk them like this. I had the colored one. I still have it. It's over 50 years old. I started kindergarten at 5. It was the school down the street. What's interesting is it was an extension to a high school that my great-grandfather found. My great-grandfather was the first teacher in Oklahoma City. He started public schools for Indians and black people. His name is in the ground at some of those places. You know how in the neighborhood they put your name with all the information? His name is there. But then something really bad happened. My father died when I was 6 years old. So that's the answer to that question. It's like, why did I leave? My daddy died. And he was on that deathbed. They said he had a year to live. So he had 1 year. He said, I'll be here 1 year. He died a year later. During that time, I get very thirsty. I take meds like you guys. While he was on his deathbed, he made a point of me having war orphan benefits, and he had a $10,000 insurance policy. How many of you read Raising the Sun? Well, if you remember, the big issue is that $10,000, insurance policy. But you got to realize, those who were in the Korean War, they had that. $10,000 insurance policy. I have no idea how much it would be today. But you can do a lot of stuff with it at that time. But because my mother only had a college degree in music, piano, she couldn't get a job in school systems. She didn't have a degree in music education. Instead, she knew she had to go get a master's in music. So she and my daddy sat there and planned how to do this. And he decided she would go to graduate school at American University in Chicago, and I would stay there with my aunt and uncle. And where they were at the time was Alexandria. So now I've gone to one school and there's another school I've gone to. So I stayed with my Aunt Ruth and Uncle Talbot, and suddenly my mama came to see me for my birthday, and she wouldn't let me stay anymore. She said I loved my Aunt Ruth too much. So then I was sent to live with my grandparents. You have to realize that they're Methodists. Methodist ministers move and move and move. So as fast as I would go to their house, they'd be at some other place, So I was in Alexandria, then I was in Lake Charles. These are Louisiana places. Then I just kept going. Then my mom had to go Europe, had to go to finish school and everything. I stayed with grandmother and papa. Of course, I started feeling abandoned. But that's just the way it was in those days. I couldn't go, but the problem is I didn't know why. My daddy died in November, And here it is, almost January, and she's trying to get to a cab. I grabbed her legs at the bottom. She's trying to go, and I'm holding on to her legs. My grandmother's holding on to my legs. So anyway, it presented a lot of problems because as I grew up, I had a great problem at abandonment. Okay, I want you to get a sense of how I was raised. How to raise a colored, Negro, Afro-American, black child. Me. I don't use African American under any circumstance. I use black. Well, I was taught these basic things. Do unto others. I'm sure you know that one. God is love. But this is one that was a motto at the black high school. Strive not to excel, but to exceed. We were taught you had to be 2 or 3 times better than white people, so we had to do that. I was taught music because, and arts, because they felt it was essential to being a whole educated person. I had to learn to read by the time I was 4. Why? I had to be able to read those signs, colored, white. I couldn't make any mistakes, you know? So I think all kids had to read by the time they were 4 if they were like me. Only proper language could be used. No ain'ts, none of that. And you had to be punctual. We were so punctual as a family. We'd go to the train station 2 hours before the train was supposed to be there. And we say, Papa, why do we have to be here so early? The train doesn't come for 2 hours. He said, that's why they call it waiting rooms. I was not allowed to say yes, ma'am, or yes, sir to anyone. Instead, I would say yes, Mrs. such and such, yes, Mr. such and such. Then I was not allowed to be called nigger. That name could not be used. I could not go to places that were segregated. In other words, if you had movie theaters, there was the crow's nest at the top that Negroes sat in. No teasing, no bunkety-bunk music. You don't know what that is? Jazz, gospel, rock, none of that. I was not allowed to do that. I only do classical music, hymns, and spirituals, black spirituals. That's it. Don't point at graveyards because your finger will fall off. You cannot miss school. And even if we go out of town, I'd go to whatever school was in that town. No gambling, no bike until you're 10, no stockings until you're 12, no makeup until you're 15, no alcohol, no parties, and you can double date at 16. Remember that. I can double date at 16. We'll see what happens at 16 when I move to Iowa City. Had to go to church every Sunday because you might meet your man, for your life man there. So you had to go to church. And your friends had to come from church. And last but not least, I was taught that no man wants a dumb girl. So anyway, as I said, I only like to be called black. Any questions so far? Yes?
What years were you in Oklahoma?
1948, until my daddy died in 52.
And this church, what religion was that?
My grandfather was a Methodist.
Not AME.
Just straight Methodist.
I was AME.
The smart one. I'm serious, because it was based on protest. The Methodist Church would not allow blacks to go to communion without being segregated. So the AMEs opened a church just for that purpose. Okay, I'm gonna tell you something about church if you brought it up. That's the next thing, church.
Would you be willing to say why black and not African American?
Because black is political. Black means I'm politically concerned about the social well-being of black folks. Black means also that I love the parts of me that are African. Black is really great and to love, although, maybe I'll read this one first. Although black was a bad thing to say down south. I had a second grade teacher named Miss Mayfield. The name of the school was First Ward, and it was in Lake Charles, Louisiana. This was a segregated school. There was always a tattletale in the class that say things that you're not supposed to say. One little boy, Miss Mayfield, Tommy called me black. And you know what every kid did? Ooh. Then Miss Mayfield looked at all of us and forcefully said, in this room, everyone is black. And simultaneously, guess what they said? Ooh. In retrospect, Miss Mayfield was ahead of her time. Thank you, Miss Mayfield. So, can you realize it's just black was something you didn't say? Now we'll go back to, want to give you a little bit about religion and grandmother. Am I going too fast? No. I'll give you a break in a bit. Okay, I have never not known church. I know it's a double negative, but I'm doing it anyway. I have never not known church, particularly the Methodist church. It's what formed my inner being. With a grandfather who was a Methodist minister and an uncle who was a bishop in the Methodist church, there was no way to escape. Going back to the Civil War, it was Methodism that we all were. Yes, it was even Methodism for the masters. Then somewhere along the line, maybe my grandmother's father got tired of he never had been a slave. That's an interesting point. My great-grandfather had not been a slave. So he was kind of grown up in a Quaker way. And so maybe he got tired of that and wanted something a little more exciting. And so he started the very first Christ Holiness Pentecostal Church. It was one of the Holiness churches, So he started that. As a child, Catholicism was considered a faulty religion, almost sinful. They worshiped statues and drank real alcohol. Methodists only drank unfermented wine. Have you heard of that? Right. When friends come to play me, my grandpa said, "What church do you go to?" And as soon as kids said, "Oh, Catholic," that was taken seriously. So we even had our differences in the church, in the community as black people. Before my friends would open their mouth, he would say, "Oh, Catholic." And when we played, no cards were allowed except old maids. And no dice. But they would keep getting me games that had dice, like Monopoly. Couldn't play it. I could play checkers with my grandfather. Also, I could go and play ball outside with my grandfather. I could only listen to so-called good music, like spirituals, classical music, and hymns. Never that bunk music, and like jazz, blues, rock. I never could listen to that. And of course, only unfermented wine. Once I invited my grandmother's church, I went to my grandmother's church, the one that she had grown up in Hazelhurst, Mississippi. The one that her father had pastored at. The church had been remodeled, but the preaching and the music were probably the same from the time ago. Fire and brimstone preaching, all the bunky music one could hear. My grandma sat in her wheelchair with her head held down. We were surprised. She had grown up in this bunky music and didn't want us to play it. Conversion seems to become part of the tradition on this female side. That's because we are rebels. My grandmother became a Methodist, and I became Catholic. Developing and evaluating a belief system is norm, and it must if we're going to grow up. Now my daughter is Jewish. She was a Catholic before she was Jewish, but she liked this Methodist church we went to. She used to call herself a Methodic. So basically, a Catholic who became a Methodic and finally became Jewish. And I didn't have a problem with that. Each must find their own belief system, so it didn't blow my mind. Okay. I want to say something about death. When my daddy died, I was 6 years old. I remember it as if it was yesterday. The tall, beautiful man was no longer with us. People think children will forget the pain, but I never did. I remember the funeral and the wake and the cemetery. I remember sitting in the very front pew with my mother to my left and my grandparents, his parents, to my right. I tried to stay far from my mother because over there, my mother would go, ah, ah, and going crazy, you know, and having these ladies with white fans and everything coming up to help her. And then over here, my grandmother was silently sobbing. I didn't want to go there, didn't want to go there. From my 6-year-old vantage point, my mother was scaring me all the time about this. And I remember trying to get past the idea that my father's body was in that casket. I remember them holding me getting me past the idea that that was him in the casket. So right before the end of the service, I still didn't believe it. So they stood me up on the pew. And my uncles came and brought the casket over to me and opened it so I could see it for a final time. Didn't look like him, because evidently he was suddenly large. And last time I'd seen him, he was, so I'd forgotten what he looked like on a normal basis. That's why I don't like gladiolas. I just can't stand them because they remind me of my father's funeral. I don't like hearing taps played because he had taps and guns. And I remember them folding the flag and giving it to my mother. He was buried at Trice Hill Cemetery, the cemetery for colored people. So we couldn't even be buried with you folks. I'm serious. Trice Hill Cemetery has all of the stuff, all of my relatives, going back 3 generations. All of them are in the colored cemetery. So anyway, talked about death. Then I talked about a journey, which is the awakening journey. I lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. You're going to hear a lot of this. I lived in. See if I can make it easier. Oklahoma City to Alexandria, Louisiana, to Lake Charles, Louisiana, to Waco, Texas. Waco, Texas. Then New Orleans, again, different school by that time. Then Knoxville, Tennessee. This is about Knoxville, Tennessee. And then in 7th grade, I was in New Orleans. 8th grade and 9th grade, I was in South Carolina, Orangeburg, South Carolina. I entered Iowa City High on my junior year. So I finished junior, senior year at City High. So this is when I lived in Knoxville. I was in 6th grade. My mother was teaching at a black college called Knoxville College. Before I go any further, I must explain that black colleges are not a form of segregation. It was the only place we could go to college after high school, a black something. Now, even more so, it's the reason my mother had to leave. She couldn't go get a degree at the white universities, so she had to leave. That's why my mother was gone most of the time. And I always blamed her for leaving me until I finally realized I'm getting therapy now because Jim Crow gave me post-traumatic stress. I'm serious. Yeah. And so, in a lot of ways, that's what happened. Then my mother had to come to take a trip to the University of Iowa to play her PhD recital for her thesis advisor. It was around Thanksgiving holiday. This meant I had to miss some days from school, but my teachers gave me assignments to do to come back and talk about it. It snowed in Knoxville, but the snow melted too fast. But I got there, snow all over the place. It was really wonderful, and it didn't melt. The first place we went once we arrived in Iowa City was the brand new Burge Hall, which had guest rooms. Oh my God, I was just in such shock. Burge Hall was fabulous. Iowa City not only had white snow, but plenty of white people. Burge was so modern, the look was psychedelic. It was a new kind of modern. It was psychedelic with 50 million different colors and clean. Down below the lobby, there was this beautiful staircase that took you down to the dining room. I felt like a princess, so I would like grandly go down, And I just couldn't get over that. Then we went to the old music building, not Hampshire, the old music building, which was near Hamburger's Inn. Well, we went to Hamburg to eat, then went to the old music building. It's Hamburg Inn, we could sit anywhere. Isn't that interesting? I could sit anywhere. Was very different than on the other side of the Mason-Dixon line. Another thing that happened going to Iowa City then was we sat in the colored cars, and when we crossed the Mason-Dixon line, we could then go into the other cars. We couldn't even eat in the dining cars.
When did you come to Iowa?
Well, one time in Knoxville, when I came this time to Knoxville. But we just came so my mother could get help with her thesis recital. My mother was a concert pianist, and she came for her professor to hear her recital. And that was when I was 12.
That was when you were in Burge.
That's when I wasn't living in Burge yet. That's where we stayed, because Burge was new and had guest rooms. So we stayed in the guest rooms at Burge.
What year?
I was 12.
I mean, here. Not your age, but...
60.
Thank you. 58.
I did the math.
Okay. I have a hard time remembering. I was born in 48, and I was 12 in 58. 10, then 60. You can't test an old woman like that. Especially when she's had a stroke, that's just too much. The old music building, when I went there, I could hear all opera singers. I heard violins and pianos throughout the building. My mom went upstairs on the 4th floor to the practice rooms. And in every room there was a grand piano. Can you believe that? A grand piano. So she went into one to practice. I had to go in the other and practice. Can you imagine that? Black colleges didn't have a grand piano in every room and tuned. Here's the most interesting thing that had happened to me in Iowa City at that time. I don't know if any of you remember Dr. Dewey, Mary Beth Dewey, and her husband Lee Dewey. And what happened is they invited us to Thanksgiving meal. But everything prior to that, we had been trained as young black children to know every etiquette principle and learn all the rules so that we could eat with white people. I know that sounds awful, but we were prepared. So I was prepared. I went to Dr. Dewey's house and we had Thanksgiving dinner. The first white family I ever ate with. I was 12. Can you believe that? Had not eaten with white people before then. I hope you remember some of the things I did. Okay, civil rights. I got off of the train in 1964 in Orangeburg, South Carolina, after a summer with my grandparents in New Orleans. My mother met me. She said, "You know what your friends are doing there at the March on Washington?" I hadn't paid much attention to it, but my friends were all at the march. From then, I went straight to the church, which was the Office for the Civil Rights Movement, and went with a sign, was taught about picketing, what to do if I got hurt, how to hold my hands and head and everything not to get hurt. So I hit the picket line on that day. Orangeburg, South Carolina, 1963. Blacks and whites, civil rights. Sit-ins, eat-ins, protesting shouts. Sing out, freedom, freedom, freedom now. Do you want your freedom? Certainly, Lord. Do you want your freedom? Certainly, Lord. Do you want your freedom? Certainly, Lord. Certainly, 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 Lord. Will you go to jail? Certainly, Lord. Will you go to jail? Certainly, Lord. Will you go to jail? Certainly, Lord. This man said, will you go to jail? Yes! Will you go to jail? Yes! He said, come on, we're going. That's exactly. Remember the pictures of us walking? That's when that happened.
And where were you going?
To jail. I'm serious, we were going to jail.
But like to a lunch counter first to do something wrong, or you just?
No, we were marching downtown. And when they heard, somebody would always say that the niggers are coming. Watch out. We were met by the fire hoses. We were met by police. We were met by all of that stuff, And here I am, 15 at this time. Then, I don't read this, I can tell you the experience. Reading is a problem. The singing part is a problem for me. I had a stroke, I can't sing anymore. Right, Gene? So, went down, marching with my kids, my friends, and we were going, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom. After a while, before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave, go home to my Lord and be free. I'm trying, but can't do it. And Rachel remember when I could. So we get downtown, there's the fire hose, and it was raining. So the police said, shut up, you niggas, shut up. They came around to me. I was so scared I couldn't stop singing. And I said, before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. He caught me by the back of my neck, threw me in the street, and threw me in a cop car. Then my mother came around, that's my child, you're arrested. They took her and put her in a police car. So Anyway, if you remember that jail with the stockade, that was the jail we were in, I was in. They took the adults to Columbia, South Carolina as prisoners in Columbia. Us, the young ones under 18, we went to the Pink Castle. That's what it was called. The Pink, it was pink. To this day, it's pink. The Pink Castle. Another time when we were protesting, I was not only put in jail, but instead this time I was put in the bullpen. How many of you heard of a bullpen? So I was with my best friend Lerma. We were all in the bullpen. And when it was time, this is where I'll read, because I don't want to upset anybody. The name of the mayor in that time was Clyde E. Fair. It was raining fire hoses with dogs and policemen. We were kicked, bashed, thrown, and beaten. Taken to jail, $1,500 bail. I never was worth that much any other time. Solitary cell. 5 days and fortnight spent in Whitey's jail. Pissed in a jar in front of 4 white men. We're in a bullpen. So how are we gonna go to the bathroom? So they bring me a jar, and you had to sit on, and the prisoners were all around us, the ones who were supposed to be. I mean, how humiliating. There's a reason I'm telling you all these sad stories. But I'm trying to explain what it was like for this kind of girl to suddenly end up in Iowa City. What a trauma all of it was. One time when I was on the picket line, we were taught to picket like this. Face straight, like this, and keep your eyes straight. But one day I got nosy. I could see out my peripheral vision, excuse me. Right there was a black car, and it was a white man playing with himself. Again, I wonder how many other black children like me ended up with post-traumatic stress. And you know, like John Lewis, the congressman, from Bloody Sunday, he suffers with PTSD. PTSD, which one? PTSD. So as a result of all that, now you know, I come here with all of that. Okay, don't you need a little break? Huh?
Yeah, before you take the break. I was way before your time.
Uh-huh.
Way far before your time, and born and reared in the segregated South. Mm-hmm. And as I find it interesting, when I came back, I was in England during the early 60s. Mm-hmm. But that's when you guys got into this black thing.
Yes, it was toward the end of the 60s.
Came along, I was a Negro and colored.
You went through colored, Negro, and what else?
That's it.
We went through colored. Don't you remember colored, Negro, then it was Afro-American. Remember, it was Afro.
Afro came up.
And then it became black. And then what you have today, which I think stinks.
Negative thing during my time, and I still have a problem
with black?
With calling someone black.
Yeah, because we were reared to not do that, not even to each other. Yeah. But if a white person did, what do you do if a white person called you black?
Yeah, see, it was negative. It's very different.
Huh?
And just hearing you from a later time.
It wasn't any different. That's a good point. In other words, you're older than me.
Yeah, definitely so.
So that's true. What it shows is time hadn't changed. So.
See, and you were part of an educated group, your parents and all. Mm-hmm. My parents were low-income people, but we lived in a black neighborhood.
And so did we.
And all in the school. And was very proud of it, because right across the street from me was a black physician. Mm-hmm. And his home was very elegant. Mm-hmm. We were in a rental place. So
there were bougie people wrapped around you.
Yeah. And the thing is, and I've mentioned to my friend, that Marion Anderson and different people, when they came to town, they could not live in a hotel. Often those kind of black entertainers would stay overnight.
They would stay overnight at the mansion. My grand-aunt, I had an aunt that had a mansion. They would like be, what's his name? All these famous authors and musicians stayed with her. She had a 28-room mansion. So my father's people were black aristocrats. And my mother's people were just bougie. So do you need a little bathroom time or something? Or do you want me to keep going? Any more questions?
I have one. You came to Iowa City to move in '64?
Yeah, when the Civil Rights Bill had just passed.
Yeah.
Yes. When you had just passed the Fair Housing Act, which is the other thing which my mother couldn't bring me before. She couldn't stay anywhere in the dorms. The dorms weren't integrated yet. So you usually had to stay at the home of some white person that would accept you, okay? So we heard the Fair Housing Act had been passed. So it was a good time to bring me here, right? But everywhere we went, nobody would let us rent because they said we were single women. They don't rent to single women. So that was everywhere we went. Then finally, my mama went and had a sit down in the housing office at the university. And know what happened? She said, I'm gonna sit here because everybody here says we're two single women. We're a married woman and her daughter, a single mother and a daughter. Can we find a place to stay anywhere here? So we ended up at the Quonset hut. The one across the street from City Park. So, huh?
I stayed in one of those with my mother.
Wasn't it cold?
A Quonset hut.
They had potbelly stoves. So as soon as I got to Iowa City, of course, I was sad. I did not want to come here. I had just been in a court case desegregating Orangeburg High. We won it, so then it's like the Little Rock 9. We were the Orangeburg 12. So I was supposed to go to a white school anyway. So Iowa City was where I came. Only difference is, had I gone to Orangeburg High, I would have gone there with my friends. When I came here to City High, I think there were 3 black men. I wrote my friend Lerma a letter. Said, Dear Lerma, I'm already in Iowa City. Wish I was back in Orangeburg. I miss you and Navon and the rest of our Jailbird Club members. I'm living in a tin box called a Quonset hut. I hate to think how cold it will be this winter. I've been here for 2 weeks, and the only time I see a Negro is when I look in a mirror. Oh, I live across the street from the park. They have swimming pool there. I can go to it. Don't worry, girl, I said. Not until my hair gets done. But then you have to go to Cedar Rapids to get your hair done. So some of us know what happens. You get in the water. Your hair was done before you went into the water. You got in it. You got out of it. You know what I mean. Then my mother allowed me to go visit Lerma for Christmas. Lerma was in Norfolk, and I was in Iowa City. But that comes to the next of my story. The next story is called Plantation Mentality. I'm already here in Iowa City. Couldn't find a place to live, and didn't see any other black folks. I mean, we'd go to Chicago and see black folks and go, there's one. Plantation mentality. Don't you think Jim G is cute? I was asked by everybody. Don't you think he's cute? They would ask me the same thing at church, too. You want to sit? Well, Jim G., let me tell you who Jim G. was. The good citizens of Iowa City had heard about Prince Edward County, Virginia, and heard that the schools, they closed the schools rather than integrate. Just closed all the schools. So you had all these black people with no schools to go. So citizens at Iowa City decided to bring some of these kids here and let them stay in homes and go to their schools. Problem is, only one stayed, Jim G. He was popular. There were 2 other black men at City High, but Jim G brought the magic number of black guys to the rip-roaring, exciting number of 3. Well, maybe dating is possible, I thought. I first met Jim G at the First United Presbyterian Church, better known as Old Brick. The one with the doves and the bats flying up in the belfry. Back to the story. One of the great things in Iowa City is the nice thing that they want to be proactive. That always has been. There were always some citizens that were, what do I want to say, a little militant, more than others. Jim G stayed at the home of Reverend Zerwas. Anybody know that name? He was the minister at Old Brick. Jim went home during the Christmas holidays. My mother and the Zerwases thought it would be so good if I go with him since I wanted to go see my girlfriend in Norfolk. So we decided to bus together. Well, on that bus trip, we became girlfriend and boyfriend as we kissed all the way to Virginia. Now I had someone to take me to the prom and have dates with. Even though there were a ton of white boys at City High, this is what I'm talking about, plantation mentality. The white folks found it more interesting to match us up. Let's get this Negro boy here with this Negro girl, put them together. That way Negro boy won't be with our white girls. He finally got a Negro girl to help him out. But of course, in my life, we also thought that was weird, to even think of even dating a white person. I never even thought, it never came to my mind. It would have been a very strange situation. So we all were alike then. Even though they didn't want us to work, marry each other, but couldn't they see that looking at me, something happened. Somebody white got together with somebody. During my senior year, Jim and I broke up. Now that I was senior, my mother gave me permission. What did I tell you in the rules of how to rear a black girl? Don't date until you're 16, and it has to be a double date. Well, now I could have a double date. That was when I met Phil Hubbard Jr. Well, Phil Hubbard, seems like some of you are laughing, so you must know who I'm talking about. He was in engineering, and then he became academic dean. And Hubbard Park is named for him. Phil and I became an item. Now I had a date for the weekends and eventually prom, so I thought. Prom time. I asked the principal if it would be okay if I bring my boyfriend to the prom with me. Only City High kids could go to City High proms. And the principal said, yes, of course. So I got the answer I wanted. But then I got mad. Think about it. I got mad that they're willing to break the rules for me to make sure I go with a black child, you know? I mean, it's just, so I didn't go. I was so mad.
So where was Phil Hubbard from?
He lives here. His father was academic dean here.
But he wasn't,
Oh, originally?
no, I mean, he couldn't go to the prom because he wasn't.
University High.
Oh,
At this point, he was a freshman in college. He was also a freshman in college.
Right,
But you get the feeling I had?
yeah.
That's what I'm calling plantation mentality. Here's a male slave, here's a female slave. Let them have a bunch of pickaninnies together, huh? So Iowa City High School. I'm gonna tell you, that is a beautiful school. Iowa City High School, the 11th school. When I first saw Iowa City High, I was extremely overwhelmed by its majesty with a theater attached at one end and the Statue of Liberty in front. The lawn was beautiful. There was nothing like this at Wilkerson. Wilkerson sat in a field of dirt. It was an open space school, so they had like the street that goes down where everybody went back and forth. Between each building, there was a sidewalk, and you would go into your class and then bring all your books out, your coat, and go to the next one. It did not have lockers or anything like that. Okay, the books. Let's talk about the books. Wilkerson, we had books that sometimes written in them said nigger, all kinds of stupid stuff like that from white kids. Because we got the used white kids books. Used white kids desk. Now you see why we wanted to get things straight? I couldn't believe this beautiful high school. It was just so wonderful. It had lockers. It had all these beautiful chairs and desks. And they had new books. New books. That really got me. And didn't have niggery in it. Did not. I felt like I had died and gone to heaven. It's really, the truth is, I didn't really understand what we were fighting for in Orangeburg until I saw Iowa City High School. Now that's what we're fighting for. So then, I go in to register. I came to City High with an honor roll A and B average, straight A's and B's, one of the top students in the class. In fact, to integrate Orangeburg High, you had to be an A or B student. They wanted only the smart ones to go to Orangeburg High. Same thing with the Little Rock situation. They only wanted to send the best students. So I go to register, and I'm college bound. So that's what they put me in, college bound work. But they also had a new American history course. They decided to get us ready for college and have someone talking to us. And we would go to separate classes just like you would here, having a big course of all these people, and you all get those sections. And so they wanted to get us ready for college. First problem, I didn't understand a word they said. I don't know what speech they were speaking, but not the one I did. I mean, I spoke English, but what they were speaking, I don't know. For example, they would say, "This is for you." And we used to say, "This is for you." Things like that. So I'm not understanding what they're saying. But I tried. But I do know they didn't talk about slavery. The Civil War was not about slavery. It was an economic problem, right? Well, what was the economy? Slaves, okay? So they didn't talk about, but they talked about Booker T. Washington and how important he was as a Negro. The moment they say Negro, all the kids looked at me. So then it got worse. City High, I felt dumb. I felt stupid. I never went to anyone's house. I never, I had no social life except for my dates with Jim G.R., Phil Hubbard. I was so alone and felt so ugly. Everything was so bad they sent me to a therapist who tried to say I had no self-confidence. Therapists did not understand. It's not that I have no self-confidence, just that I had it when I got here and somebody beat it out of me. So Anyway, back to the school situation. I would go into French. That didn't work. Couldn't understand the French teacher because she was from Paris and she spoke strict French. I had a South Carolina French teacher. She would say, "Le garçon," "Le jeune." I mean, come on, the very South Carolina approach. So my whole accent was really off. Chemistry, let's go to that one. I started at chemistry at first, but I was about to fail, so they put me in the tech ed science. But I was kind of shocked when I noticed everybody had a Bunsen burner. Everybody had chemicals. I mean, but I didn't understand why I couldn't do well in chemistry, but of course you're going to hear this word over and over again. But I had background problems. That's what they said. She has background problems. If you knew my history, you would laugh. But I had to eventually take chemistry, so they let me take it again in my senior year. I finally passed with a C. That's about it. I couldn't do any better. So what had been an A and B student was now a C student. So it messed myself up for going to college. It was really a mess. So the other thing that happened to me at City High, you're looking at the all-state pianist. I think I told you I was the #1 pianist. Here's the reality of what happened. To be the all-state pianist, you had to first learn all the music for all-state. You had to play a solo, had to play scales, you had to sight read, all of that. It really was a harder thing to do, is become an all-state pianist. I had been the choir accompanist at City High. So I was known for playing piano and dancing, you know. I'm serious. I never get any other kind of dance role or acting role, just dancing. But anyway, back to all-state. I went to Drake University to audition on this wonderful fall morning, and we found out I had made it there. I was going to be an all-state pianist, but we were so happy. We came back here and rejoiced and rejoiced. It was announced in school. But it didn't get announced in the newspaper because by that time, the all-state office said I could not be all-state pianist because I had been in the all-state choir. And since I was in the all-state choir, I had to be in the all-state choir. Anybody knows all-state? What do you do at all-state for choir? 4 people go and sing some of, and that's it, just 4 people. Then you sing with 600 people on television in the morning. I was so hurt. I was so devastated. Finally did something where I was good. So then, the man who solved a lot of my problems when I was there was Mr. Jablonski. Mr. Jablonski was the choir director and my savior. I had other saviors too. Mr. Jablonski and Mr. Hill, the orchestra conductor, decided they were going to go and check the rule out. They went through all the rule books from the past. They couldn't find such a law. But then, when they came and told me they tried, at least they tried, I was devastated. And then they came to me and said, "We hate to tell you this, Tisch. We can't find it in the rule books. We think it's because you're a Negro." Okay. The devastation I felt from then on was, why didn't they help me? Why didn't you fight for me? Why did you let me be disturbed by this, you know? I was the all-state pianist. I was fabulous. Anybody heard me play, you know what I'm talking about. I'm good. So I was just very hurt. So what made it worse was that we stayed in a dorm in Des Moines, a hotel in Des Moines, and I had white roommates. They kept telling me I had a chip on my shoulder and get over it. Why do I always think things are about race? Get over it, you know? It was just like, anyway.
Because they are.
Huh?
Because they are.
Because they what?
They are about race.
But that's the problem. You can't say that. When I went to City High, I joined journalism class because I thought I had things to write about. So I wrote in the newspaper. Of course, I'm going to write a noteworthy article. So guess what I wrote about? The Civil Rights Movement and how glad I was to be here at Iowa City High. And then they published it. Nothing about movements or anything in it. They took out all the stuff that had to do with movements because what I did was militant and unconstitutional as far as they were concerned. I was told, I used to wear NAACP core SNCC buttons. I was told to take it off because I don't need it here. You tell me the truth. So, anyway, I guess I'm saying all of this to say, just because you come to Iowa City, I mean, it was a precious place in a funny way. It gave me the best music education I could have ever had then when I was in high school. We're not going to even finish the rest of my life. But in high school, I had excellent music teachers. I had the music teachers that my mother had. So I love that about Iowa City. But I learned about institutionalized white racism. And I learned about this subtle racism where down south we had right-on prejudice. But here we had something that I had never seen before. And it still exists. I haven't been to Iowa City for quite a while, but I bet you it still exists and some of you notice it now. That was the point, is that way back then nobody observed it. Nobody understood what I was going through. But then, as years went by, I was having trouble with this abandonment problem into therapist after therapist, only to finally realize Jim Crow gave me PTSD. Jim Crow, ain't that something? And then I had a stroke later, and now I'm bipolar. So, any questions?
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Really? Yes.
What was your transition from music to theater?
Oh, I always wanted to be in theater, but in our family, everyone had to take piano and one string instrument. You get it whether you like it or not. You can't say no to that. That's what you get. So I always had that, but I always wanted to do theater. My mother said when I did a play, I said, I don't want to stop doing this. She said, go to college and major in theater. I never had the problem with parents not wanting you to major in theater. I was promoted because I was artistic family background. Everyone plays music or theater. My mother, as I said, was a concert pianist. My aunt was over the music program for the National Endowment of Art. And what happened by then was she was a symphony flutist. So I wanted to talk about reparations for a minute. Is that a naughty word to bring up?
What word's that?
Reparations.
No.
I think reparations would be very important to have. I think it would solve some problems. I believe I already have my reparations. I don't need it. I got it. My theory is that if other blacks that got out of slavery had reparations, they would probably have done much better than they are doing now. Because that's what I think made me, not made my family, not me. I wasn't a slave. My great-grandmother was a slave master's daughter. The slave master was a successionist and was Supreme Court in Hazelhurst, Mississippi. And they acknowledged that was their daughter. When she decided to get married, he decided as a present to get them 40 acres and a mule. To this day, that 40 acres has grown to 120 acres and we still have it. We are a family of very educated people, which I think is marvelous. And especially when you look at me and say, I'm just a third generation from slavery. I believe that they had something to start off with, they have somewhere. The way it works in America, you got the rich and you got the blacks, right? So as this goes up, it keeps going like this, and then sometimes it goes like this. And I believe in reparations. You want to fuss about that? We can fuss about it.
How many generations should get reparations? Should your daughter get reparations?
The land is
You do?
that land is air property. H-E-I-R, air property. It belongs to all the offsprings of that one lady. Air property. So,
Where is your mother?
she died.
She died. You said your father died.
Well, my mother died not too long ago, I think. I don't remember the date. We forget those things eventually. But she died. But she had gotten her PhD here, which is why we were here. I got my MA and MFA here. But it was interesting. I came here from MFA in theater. I got kicked out because I had no survival talent in American theater. So I got kicked out. But that's the same as when I was in high school. My mother was told, Genevieve got to understand she has background problems. She's not college material. By the time Geneva finished cursing him out, that was the end of that. But the truth is I had trouble in Iowa getting into a college after the grades I got at City High. And the reason is there was a rule in Iowa that to go to an Iowa State school, you had to, with a 2.5, you had to be over a 2.5. So I couldn't go. Then it's the in-state thing. Can't go in-state. Why? Because in-state, I couldn't even go in-state. Had not finished the right way. Went to a high school. So the rule now is if you graduate from Iowa College, Iowa High School, you can get admittance. But that rule hadn't passed yet. So Mr. Jablonski took me around to every college, went to Cole, Cornell, went to all these colleges to get in. Couldn't get in. But I couldn't even go to the black colleges because I was not in-state here. I was not in-state anywhere else. But then I ended up going to University of Minnesota, graduated summa cum laude. And then I came here finally with my MA, MFA in acting. What happened, as I said, they kicked me out. The next thing I know, they invite me back. They not only invite me back to finish an MFA in directing, they hired me. So I can say Iowa does have some wonderful choice. I mean, my time at Iowa City was growth oriented. I just think Iowa City is unique, except we got to work on that racism problem. I could go on and on, but I am tired. Okay, now look at this in context. Mommy and daddy.
Now, is your father white or black?
Black.
In the picture, he looks so light.
So is Mom. We just light-skinned black folks. That's me as a baby. That's me at 3 when I wanted to go to the colored fountain, the white fountain. Okay, you know about this. They took the seats out. This is me at mass meeting. This is my girlfriend Lerma with her mother. This is me somewhere in there at a prayer sit-in. We had sit-ins that we just went to the middle of the square and prayed for the city. Iowa City High School, I'm in there. Me after getting out of jail. My black school, the difference there. Black school down here, black school up there. Me practicing for Allstate. Remember that. Me practicing, it's even written in the book. Tisch practices her pieces for Allstate. The stockade with the jail, the Pink Castle, all of us waiting to be booked. My mother. And me by the fire pole marching to jail. That's it. Now does it have context?